Let it go, make my body go, make our bodies higher and higher.
Like many lists in Excel, this list that we're seeing here, it's on a worksheet called Freezing, in the workbook 08 Worksheet Views. If we start to scroll downward, using either arrow keys or the mouse, we lose sight of the top row. Titles are often in a single row up top. They can be in multiple rows in some cases. But the idea is, as we move up and down, we'd like to see row 1 all the time in this particular worksheet. Make sure it's visible. Go to the Freeze Pane option. It's on the View tab in the ribbon. Freeze Panes, and we've got a choice called Freeze Top Row. Now, the active cell doesn't have to be in the top row right now, but it has to be visible, the row that you'd like to freeze. Freeze Top Row. And now, as we start to scroll downward, using either arrow keys or mouse wheel, or the scroll bar on the right-hand side, we always see row 1. This has no implications whatsoever about printing. It's not related to that at all. It's just a visual change on the worksheet. If at a later time, or if for a certain time you don't need to use this or don't want to have it visible, go back to Freeze Panes and Unfreeze Panes. Now, you can also freeze the leftmost column. Make sure the column that you want to freeze is visible. The idea here might be, as we scroll rightward, using either arrow keys or the scroll bar along the lower right portion of the screen, we're losing sight of what's in column A. So maybe we're looking at these compensation amounts out here. Who is this person right here? Well, we have to scroll leftward to see who that is. So we might like to see column A all the time. Make sure it's visible. Active cell can be anywhere. Go back to Freeze Panes, and this time we're going to freeze the first column. And now, as we scroll rightward, we always see column A. And as we scroll up and down, we're not seeing row 1 all the time now. That might be useful, but for the moment, we're seeing column A all the time. No matter how far we scroll left and right, column A is always visible. Now, there could be times when you might want to see more than one column on the left-hand side. In that case, let's go back to Freeze Panes and unfreeze the panes. What if we'd like to see columns A, B, and C all the time, no matter what? We want to position the active cell in column D right here. And because we want to freeze more than one, we want to go to the top row here. In other words, D1. Then Freeze Panes and choose Freeze Panes, not first column. And the description, keep rows and columns visible while the rest of the worksheet scrolls based on current selection. That doesn't really tell us how to do it, but positioning the active cell where this is right now means we're going to freeze everything to the left of this. Now, as we scroll rightward, columns A, B, and C are always visible. You can see what's happening there. If we no longer want this feature, or if we want to set up another kind of freeze, again we go back to the Freeze Panes and unfreeze the panes. Now, what if we'd like to have both features that we've seen already together? In other words, we'd like to scroll up and down and always see row 1, and maybe scroll left and right and always see, for example, columns A and B. Let's position the active cell at C2. Be sure to have visible the row that we want to freeze and the columns that we want to freeze. So what we're about to say, although we won't see this in the menu, we want to freeze everything to the left of and above the active cell. So in this case, we go to cell C2. Freeze Panes, once again, based on current selection, although it doesn't quite tell us what that means, make the choice. Now, as we scroll up and down, we always see row 1. As we scroll left and right, we always see columns A and B. And that too, of course, has no implications regarding printing. But it's a great visual tool for someone who has to look at this data often, needs to scroll up and down, look at this, look at that. We always are sure which category we're looking at, in other words, which field name we see in the column headings, and we always know which person we're dealing with, and also the building. A lot of it's not that important, but still, you can make your choices here as to what it is you want to freeze. And if at any time you no longer want the freeze in effect, you can come back and unfreeze. It's important to note also that most of the commands in the View tab, including this one, cannot fall into the category of something you undo or redo. If you no longer need the feature, you'll turn it off, but you can't undo to turn it back on again. Of course you can apply the feature. So let's just unfreeze the panes. So at a later time, if we want to freeze again, or even now if we want to freeze, we can't go through the undo process, but it's pretty easy to set up once you do this a few times. So freezing panes makes good sense because we want to see our titles often, and it's not uncommon to also want to freeze a column as we saw in the example here. When you're looking at lists, sometimes it's advantageous to be able to see different parts of the list at the same time. And one way is to use a feature called split. Now, rather than clicking it right away, let's think out what it is we might want to do. In this list, farther down, starting about row 90, are some admin training people. And maybe I want to see those names for a while, and at the same time, also see names from our other training group, and they're located around row 500 or thereabouts. We'd like to split the screen top-bottom and be able to scroll independently on either side of that split. If you'd like to split the screen that way, top-bottom, in other words, a horizontal split, position the active cell in column A roughly halfway down. Doesn't have to be perfect or exact. In fact, you can eventually move that split line up and down. Then go to the split command. It's on the View tab in the ribbon in the window group. Split. And we see a horizontal line across the screen. We can move it up and down. We might want to consider doing that if we zoom back a little bit. So notice the two scroll bars on the right-hand side. On the upper part, I'm going to be scrolling, and watch what happens in the lower part of the screen. You can see nothing. It's just static for the moment. So let's say that I'm trying to find the data around row 90 or thereabouts. We see some admin training. In the lower part of the screen, I'm going to scroll down to around row 520 or somewhere in there. And eventually we'll see our other training group. That's the professional training group. I'm not necessarily trying to see the entire group, but I want these names on the screen at the same time. Maybe zooming back a little bit. Now the split line will move a little bit, seemingly out of place. We can move this up or down as needed. You get the idea, though, that we can scroll independently either in the bottom portion or in the top portion of the screen. If we no longer need the feature, we can go back to the split button or simply double-click this line. It disappears. Now, at other times, and particularly if we have to zoom in and we have a lot more columns, it might make sense to split the screen left-right. Now, probably that's less likely in this example, but still, we might want to be comparing some of that data on the right side with some of the data on the left side. So here, we want to position the active cell in the top row, roughly halfway across the screen, and then go to split to introduce a vertical split. And now we've got two horizontal scroll bars at the bottom. What we'll need to do, if one of them is pretty tiny, for example the one on the left, we can actually move 3 vertical dots, drag leftward there to make that scroll bar a little bit bigger if we want. So on the left side of the split line, we can scroll left and right. We can do the same thing on the right side. Now sometimes maybe hiding columns could get us the same effect, but this is faster. We also have an unusual arrangement whereby on the right side, we might be looking at columns A and B, and then on the left side, maybe we're more interested to see the compensation benefits years. So the layout here is a bit unorthodox, but we are seeing data adjacent to the other data we want to see. For example, compensation and employee name, maybe something like that. As with a horizontal split, we can take this split line and move it left-right if we want. Make it look a little bit different. Sometimes when you zoom back, you might want to see more information this way and then move that scroll bar. So we can get rid of this too, as we did with the earlier split line, simply by double-clicking. Now, if you didn't know about the feature, and maybe you're looking at your list here, active cell could be anywhere, but if you click the split line, you'll get a split above and to the left. In fact, that's what split actually does all the time, but if you've got the active cell on the top row or the left column, you only see either a vertical or a horizontal split. If the active cell is anywhere else, you'll get a split on top of that cell and to the left of it. So we've got 4 sets of scroll bars now. We've got a scroll bar at the bottom here to allow us to scroll left and right. You see what's happening? The 2 panes on the left side, we're scrolling left and right, and we can do the same thing on the right side. And also, on the right side of our screen, we can scroll up and down on the top 2 panes, and then below that, we can scroll up and down on the bottom 2 panes. And for some of us, I think this just might be a recipe for chaos and confusion. If there's anything to be proved by this, I could, for example, in the top left pane, move around there and actually get to cell A1. And in the lower right pane, I could press Control down arrow and keep doing that and go to the very bottom of the worksheet and Control right arrow. That's the extreme lower right-hand corner. So if you can see the extreme lower right-hand corner and the extreme upper left-hand corner, that simply means that we could see any 2 cells in the worksheet at the same time. But I must admit, I think for most people, this is not an efficient feature and not something you want to deal with. Either split the screen top-bottom, as we saw in our previous example, or left-right in another example. That makes sense. The four-way split, I think you'd be hard-pressed to find a good use for this. You can get rid of both of these at the same time by double-clicking the intersection here. Just double-click. So, a valuable feature if splitting left-right, and more likely top-bottom. I doubt if you want to do a four-way split, but I think you can see the need for this feature from time to time. We're looking at a worksheet called Outlining. It's in the workbook 08 Worksheet Views. It's a budget, and as we scroll to the right here, you can begin to see we're covering all the months of a year with some quarterly totals and a grand total on the right. Not a huge worksheet, and as we scroll downward, we've got some expenses starting in row 16, row 35 is at the bottom. You're a budget analyst, you're about to make a presentation of this information, and you don't want to hit your audience with all these numbers at once. You might want to collapse this and show only the quarters. Now what we could do ahead of time is drag across columns B, C, and D, and with the control key F, G, and H, and so on, we could hide those columns ahead of time. And then during the presentation, when necessary, expose that detail for each month. Now, sometimes when you're making presentations, you really don't want the focus to be on how you're using Excel or what you're doing with Excel. You want the focus to be on the numbers. So, there's a feature called Outlining that allows us to collapse this data simply by clicking buttons during a presentation. And it begins with the thought that we've got formulas, for example, in column E, they're tabulating data from the left. We've got some formulas, for example, in row 7, those are tabulating data from above. We got some more here, down the side here, row 13, that sort of thing. This is actually subtracting numbers here. And we've got some other totals. We've got totals vertically and horizontally. And it's just that simple fact that allows us to activate the outlining feature. Simply click within the data somewhere, go to the Data tab in the ribbon. Far right, you'll see a Group button, click the drop arrow, and choose Auto Outline. And suddenly the screen looks quite a bit different. These are called outlining symbols above the data, and then outlining numbers. We've got a vertical 1, 2, 3 here, and off to the left a horizontal 1, 2, 3, 4. On the vertical 1, 2, 3, I'm going to click 2, watch the screen. It collapses the data. We're only seeing the quarterly totals. Now you can see the indicator here for hidden columns. We have hidden columns between these two columns, and you can see all along here. We've hidden the monthly totals. Off to the left, we see the horizontal 1, 2, 3, 4. As I click 3, this collapses the worksheet somewhat, not a lot. Click 2, it collapses this a lot more. We're collapsing this horizontally, you might say. If I click 1, then we're only seeing one row. And then on the vertical 1, 2, 3, if I click 1, we're only seeing the total. You probably wouldn't start off this way, although with a certain flair for the dramatics, maybe you could. This is how much money we're going to make in 2017. There's our net profit. Here are the details as we click 2. And off to the left, we'll click the 2 over there. And you can imagine at different times wanting to display some or all of this data in different ways. Now, a lot of screen space is being taken up by these symbols and also by the ribbon menu system. You might not even need the menu system during your presentation. So how do we hide it? There are a couple of ways. One is to simply double-click the current tab. I'm going to double-click Data. It hides the ribbon icons but not the ribbon tabs. How do we get the icons back? Simply double-click Data again. Another approach, upper right-hand corner, we've got a button here, Ribbon Display Options. We can click this. Auto Hide hides the entire ribbon, including the tabs. We might choose that option. We also have the ability to hide these symbols as well. Simply press Control 8. That's going to hide the outlining symbols as well as the outlining numbers. Control 8. Now, after having done that, and until we resurrect those numbers, we cannot work with those to expand and collapse, but maybe we want to see the data this way. To get those numbers back, and the outlining symbols, Control 8. There we are. So at different times you might want to be using Control 8. But the simple idea that we can expand and collapse this, and we can do this in some other ways too. For example, some people are asking questions about our third quarter projections. Let's see the detail in this. Here's the plus that's above third quarter. And we're seeing the detail in our third quarter numbers here. To collapse that, here's the minus above it. And over on the left-hand side, Maybe for a while you're not showing the detail for expenses, or you don't want to show the detail. Here's a minus button to the left of row 33. Click the minus, and we're seeing the data this way. And because we've got levels of totals in some of the formulas here, we've got more outlining numbers for the horizontal view here. So we've got the ability here to collapse and expand. And if you were about to make a presentation of this data, I think you'd be pretty well prepared. In other words, you'd want to rehearse this before thinking out all these implications of expanding and collapsing this. But I think you get the idea here. A lot of capability. You're not really focusing on the power of Excel here. You're focusing on the numbers as you talk about them. If we need to zoom in and out, we can't do that right now for full screen. So if we go back to the very top of the screen and just click there, we bring back the menu on the top. Maybe we just want to have the tabs visible. And that does allow us to get to the slider control bar in the lower right-hand corner. Might click the minuses over there, if that's visible to the audience. And again, you've got these different methods here to expand and collapse the view. If you need to make changes to the layout here, click back in the data, go back to the data tab, then choose ungroup and clear the outline. So we're back to our normal view here. And we can resurrect, of course, the remainder of the menu, going back to that button in the upper right-hand corner, and simply show tabs and commands. It's a great feature. You want to experiment with it a little bit, but it allows us to make, for example, a presentation with data like this. We have that quick ability to expand and collapse it by way of the outlining capability. And for those of you who are familiar with the subtotal feature, this feature, which is in the outline group, is really more about displaying data, but it gives you the outlining capability as well, but in a different way than we've seen it here. But the outlining capability is certainly a powerful tool for presentation purposes.